Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you again today. My topic is the Tao of Debate, Just Say You're Right. And just from the title of this, I'm sure you can imagine that somewhere along the line, this was going to come into the talk somewhere. The Chapter 81 of the Tao Te Ching, those who are good do not debate. Those who debate are not good. And of course, I agree with what Lao Tzu has written here completely. But I guess in my youth I may not have agreed, because I'll be honest with you, I used to like to debate quite a bit. I found it fun, similar to the way Ed spoke last week about how he had trained physical confrontation his whole life, and so there was sort of a fun aspect to it. And even though I haven't engaged in those types of confrontations, when it comes to intellectual ones, I kind of knew what he meant, even not exactly, but a similar thing. I would find it fun. And I think the reason for that is, I want to go into the reasons why I used to like debate, and a lot of it is because of a high school speech teacher I had, and his name was Mr. Vogler. And he was loved by all his students. He was a wonderful person. He had a great sense of humor. I remember one of the things he used to do is when he would give a test, he'd immediately start talking. As soon as the test was handed out and people started working on it, he would talk about the movie he saw with his wife the night before, a restaurant that he'd been to. He'd immediately start talking. And invariably, someone would get upset because they were trying to concentrate on the test. And he would just sort of say, well, now you know what it feels like. And it was such a great way to teach the idea of respect, that, you know, when someone is trying to share information, to not how rude it is to talk or whatever. And rather than lecturing us about it, he just put the shoe on the other foot. He was a very wise man and very funny. And he's who we had for speech. And he was just, he made debate fun. His class was fun. We would have debates with each other, which he would set up. We would have parliamentary procedures. We'd have mock trials. We did all kinds of fun things. And his philosophy on debate was that debate should be about the search for the truth, and that was the purpose of debate. And he always made it a point. He was a man of great integrity, and he told us that when you're up against someone debating them, that you should never misrepresent their position. You should be fair and honest about what they're trying to say, and you should do your best to understand their position, even if you disagree with it, and to not misrepresent someone. And, you know, because he taught us those values, he made it easy to sort of learn all sorts of different sides of a point of view. Often what he would do is, if you knew you were going to have a debate tomorrow and say the subject was going to be on the death penalty, you would know that you were going to go up against another classmate again on the subject would be the death penalty, but you wouldn't know which position you were going to take, whether you were going to be for it or against it. So you had to be prepared to go both ways. And it was very good training, because it made us look at all sides of an issue. And when you're young and idealistic teenager, you probably have your own ideas of things. And it's good to sort of, it forced you to look at the other side of things and try to see things from all points of view. And so for this reason, you know, debate become fun to me. And that continued, you know, really through all the way through culture. I enjoyed this type of engagement on subjects, everything from political to non-political things. And there wasn't always political. I remember he would do funny topics. Like one time we'd have this debate over, the topic would be, what is it about mice and women that us and men don't understand, which was quite funny. And you'd sort of go up, so they would have the opposite point of view, and you would debate it. It was quite funny. And so Mr. Vogler made debate fun, but he had a great deal of integrity, which was wonderful. And when I was putting this presentation together, of course, I looked him up and looked up his picture. I learned that he had passed away in 2007, but I'll always remember him as a great teacher, and I'm sure many of my classmates will always remember him as well. He was just a man that everyone loved, great sense of humor, great integrity, and a wonderful teacher. And I was so lucky to have had him introduce me to debate. But of course, getting back to what Lao Tzu said, why I agree with Lao Tzu, despite what I've said here about my love for debate. It kind of comes down to the fact that, for better or worse, debates usually don't work out very well. And I'm going to give a couple of examples. One is going to be a recent public debate between two public intellectuals, and the other is going to be a more personal story involving my own issues with debate, and why I changed my mind and decided that, yeah, Lao Tzu actually is 100% right. So I want to talk about Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher, and he's a good guy, a very smart gentleman, and he's a big proponent of something called Rappaport's rules, which was named for a game theorist named Anatole Rappaport. And Dan is a big proponent of what Rappaport said, and he likes to point out how you should criticize with kindness. And so he really puts forth these ideas. One, you should attempt to re-express your target's position so clearly, vividly, and fairly that your target says, thanks, I wish I'd have thought of putting it that way. Two, you should list any points of agreement, especially if they're not matters of general or widespread agreement. Three, you should mention anything you have learned from your target, the target of your criticism. And four, only then are you permitted to say so much as a word of rebuttal or criticism. So, this sounds pretty good, because after all, the debate is sort of about criticizing someone else's point of view and asserting your own. And if you can do that with kindness, that's good. So this sounds pretty good. So what's the problem? Well, even someone like Dan, who's a good guy and sincerely wants to put things into, to criticize in this way, well, something happens sometimes when you actually get into a debate. And he recently, a couple of years ago, there was sort of a somewhat public debate. It was written, but it was still a public debate between him and Sam Harris. Now, of course, they're both friends. They share very similar worldviews. They've been debate partners together. Usually they debate against religion or the existence of God, because they're both, two of the four new atheists. And they both have written books on free will, and free will is sort of the subject that they disagreed on, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to get into a little bit, just briefly about that in a moment. But basically, their friendship became very by a debate. And the two positions that they have in free will, they've both written books, as I've said. Dan Dennett's book is Freedom Evolves. And Dan is a big component of compatibilism, which, this talk isn't, but just briefly, it's sort of the idea that, yes, you can have a determined world, but yet there's still room for free will. It's very subtle, and Sam, on the other hand, has a different position. His position is that free will is a complete illusion. And, it's funny, their two positions are almost identical, except for that one departure, really. But it was enough to cause a rift between them for a couple of years. And if you want to, again, this isn't about free will, but if you want to see an example of why debate's not good, if you go to samharris.org/blog, and you click on the section that says free will, you can look for something called Reflections on Free Will. And this is a review that Dan Dennett did of Sam Harris's book, Free Will. Now, Dan had actually sent him a copy of the manuscript and asked him to look it over before it was published, but Dan was busy. He didn't have a chance to do that. The manuscript, of course, got published, became a book, and Dan wrote this public review, and Sam posted it on his website and said that he would respond, and shortly, a couple of weeks after that, I think he responded with his response to the review, which was The Marionette's Lament. And so here's two friends, and their relationship became strained over this debate, over the debate of free will, which, like I said, their positions are very close to being similar, except for one thing, and that was enough to sort of cause a rift between them. So it's just an example of why debate isn't good. Very much to their credit, a couple of months ago, I think it was, they met at a conference they were at together, and Sam had a tape recording device, and so they had an interview together. It went on for almost 2 hours where they revisited the subject. And you can see that on samharris.org/podcast. It's called Free Will Revisited. Nothing was really resolved on the issue. I mean, I think, the issue of free will is a real tough one. I mean, whether or not there's free will is an illusion or not, maybe unknowable. And so it's sort of like ridiculous thing to fight about in many ways, in my opinion. But they were both kinder to each other in real time than they were trading, 10,000-word essays against each other's position. So much to their credit, I think they patched it up, even though nothing's really resolved with the topic, really. And this goes to show how debate is really bad. And you might wonder, well, what is it about debate that causes these kinds of problems? And I think mainly it's the ego. That's what really kills the debate, because you go, whether or not you're the one misrepresenting someone else's position or you're having your position misrepresented, your ego can't stand it, right? Your ego's gone through all this trouble to make its point, and now someone has misrepresented it with their ego, making their own points. And so instead of moving on to point two, your ego is forced to untangle all these other things, and it ends up into this bitterness and this fighting. And in the end, it's just not worth it. It really isn't. Even between two guys who like each other and who are very smart, it still broke down. And so that's a public example of why debate really isn't such a good thing. But I want to talk about a private one as well. This is really what taught me the lesson, and this happened, long before Dan and Sam's public debate. But my need to debate almost ruined a personal relationship of mine, and that was with my sister, my older sister, who was 6 years my senior, and that's a picture of her. I picked this picture because it really embodies her spirit. She's always had this sweet innocence. She's 6 years older than me. This picture was taken before I was even born, but it captures her essence, and it's why I love her. And so we sort of have very fond memories together as children. As my older sister, she was very kind to me. She taught me how to read. She took me into a room and she played with me. She was a very kind, loving sister. She was always there for me, and that's why I love her so much. But as adults, we both left the spiritual path we were indoctrinated into as infants, which of course was Catholicism. I think I mentioned before that I was raised Catholic. She became a fundamentalist Christian, and I became an atheist and pretty much rejected every religious view for most of my adult life. And of course, I've moved away from rejecting religious views, but even now, I approach Taoism from a secular perspective, because I don't believe in a personal God, so to speak. But what happened was, my sister and we never really had much of a debate about it. For years, even though I had rejected the faith I was brought into, or even the Christian faith, I never really said anything to her about it, because I knew she was, a born-again Christian and very fundamentalist. And so, I never really said anything. I would just sort of go along and agree with her. And at some point, I'm not sure when, I think it was in my early 30s, I felt like it was sort of being dishonest. So in an email, I chose to tell her that, hey, I don't have anything against your views. I know they work for you, but I just don't accept them. And that sort of ended up in her trying to convince me that I was wrong, and me trying to convince her that she was wrong. And even though it didn't get that ugly, it really was just sort of, back and forth. It did strain the relationship, and as a result, we sort of stayed away from each other for a while. And it really wasn't until I realized that, what, as I've said many times, and I've learned many times, when you have a problem in your life, chances are you're the source of it. And I realized I was the source of this problem. My need to be right about everything, including something like spirituality, it caused the separation. It was my fault, and I realized it. And it really became clear years ago when I first studied the Tao. And because of that, I was the one who swallowed my pride, made the contact back with my sister, and as a result, our relationship was repaired. And, I'm so glad I did that, because my sister is suffering from a rather debilitating disease right now, and I would have missed out on the time with her if I hadn't have swallowed my pride. Now I call my sister almost every day to see how she's doing. I talk to her, and it's not like she stopped being a fundamental Christian. She is. She's very religious, very important to her. She speaks of religion often. But it's funny. Once I put my arrogance and my need to be right about even a spiritual path aside, all of a sudden things happen. One, it doesn't bother me when she talks about fundamental Christianity. In fact, I can clearly now see the parallels between, what she values and what I value in Taoism. That there are so many similarities. And you'll notice too, when Bill Bunting gives talks, he often makes Christian references that are just like perfectly fit into the ideas that we have in Taoism. And it's the same thing with my sister. Now, I don't really talk about Taoism because I know as a fundamentalist Christian that would be a sore spot, so I just avoid that subject. But it doesn't bother me anymore. And I think I said because I've put aside my need to be right, and I realized that, what, there are plenty of spiritual paths, and who's to say that there's not more than one way to get there? And I know that the way to get there for me is Taoism. It's Iguan Tao. I mean, one through the path. It makes perfect sense, right? It's my path. I'm going through it, and it works for me. But I have to accept that there are other paths that are better for other people. And in the end, as long as we all get to the same spiritual destination, what difference does it really make? And so I've learned to sort of put that aside. And I want to throw out a thank you here to both Derek and Bill for teaching me this, really. And it's that I learned from both of them. First, from Bill. During one of our Tao meetings years ago, Bill told a story about what he learned from observing Master William, who was dealing with someone who wanted to argue. And Master William just didn't engage. He just responded by saying, you know what, you're right. And Bill made the point that, we can choose not to participate in these kind of debates and arguments, especially when it's so pointless ultimately. It doesn't accomplish anything. It just creates separation. And Derek makes the same point in his book, The Tao of Daily Life. There's a story in there called You Are Right. I'm just going to retell it really briefly because it's short and very funny. But essentially there's this Tao sage, and he's on a porch drinking tea with his disciple, and a couple of guys are arguing over something outside, and one of them storms off in anger. The other one comes up to the porch, and he talks to the sage. He says, Master, I'm sorry, we were arguing there, but I was trying to explain to this gentleman my point of view, and here's my point of view. Am I right? And, the sage turns to him and says, of course, you are right. And so he's happy with that, and he leaves. And a few minutes later, the other gentleman comes back, and he goes, Master, you probably noticed I was fighting with that person the other days ago, and he just wouldn't listen to reason. I mean, I was trying to explain my point of view, which is this. Was I right? And the master says, of course, you are right. And so he's pleased with that answer, and he goes on. The disciple turns to the sage, and he says, well, you told both of them that they were right. They can't both possibly be right. And the sage looks at his disciple, and he says, of course, you're absolutely right. So it's a very funny story. It doesn't require much explanation, really. The story speaks volumes about that. It's just better not to engage in things that aren't worth fighting over. In fact, and as you go on, you realize that there's really not much worth fighting for, frankly. Applying those lessons allowed me to repair the relationship with my sister. It was not easy for me, as I had to put aside my arrogance and realize that I don't have the only answers for spiritual growth, or for anything, for that matter. Not just with something important like spiritualism, but with anything. I don't have all the answers. Or, there can be multiple answers. And we have to sort of choose what works best for us. So, I'm going to start to sum it up here. Debate as a search for truth, done with the utmost respect for others, is fine. There's nothing wrong with debate as a search for truth, the way Mr. Vogler taught. The problem is that it rarely, if ever, works out that way. Mr. Vogler's class was a rare exception. So in general, it's kind of better just to avoid debate, unless it's something really important, like who shot first, Han or Guido. I mean, But outside of the world of Star Wars, I don't really think that it's really worth fighting over anything. So it's important to realize how your ego is strongly involved when you argue, and to take steps to realize that, one, and then to push it down, to let the ego take the back seat and swallow your pride and do what's best for unity and getting along with others. And the best thing to do is to defeat your ego and just say, you are right. And I found that certainly has worked in my life. I think it works, in the public example I gave, not that Sam Harris or Dan Dennett agreed with each other in the end, but, at least the second time around they things spoke in a way that's more respectful and kind to each other. So there it is, the Tao of Debate. Just say you were right. Thanks so much for listening to me today. I apologize again for the problems I had with connectivity earlier. But thank you all so much, and I hope I said something that was of use, and I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday.
Alex, that was great. And I am certainly not the only one who thinks so. From Pamela, Alex, great topic and great talk. From Tim, another winner, Alex, and your personal story really drives your point home. From Susanna, Sam Harris changed his entire philosophy and made many true atheists angry, so he sure can't be trusted. Most people know no more than anyone else, but want their opinions to appear right. So yes, and I'll also say that I have read pretty much all of Sam Harris's books. I have also read quite a few of Dennett's books as well. The first one that I read was a book that he wrote called The Mind's Eye, where the eye is not the not the visualized, but the me, myself, and I. So, and that was such an enjoyable book from Dan Dennett that it really turned me on to the rest of his philosophical works. Even today, from both of these gentlemen and from many others, I am similar to Alex in that I am also a much more secular in my approach to the Tao. Don't really feel the need for a personal deity of any description. I don't look at the Buddhas as deities either. I look at them as examples that I can learn from, that I can emulate. So even today, oftentimes when I exercise or when I need to commute someplace, I would have audiobooks from these gentlemen that I can listen to and learn from. I definitely know about the controversy that Mr. Harris has had with the other atheists. Sam Harris still does meditation. He still follows some aspects of Buddhism. He doesn't do so in a religious fashion. He does it in a secular way, but that's there, and that's just one of the many differences that he has with the other atheists. And yeah, there's a lot of anger there. Now, I'm also going to agree with, absolutely agree with Alex that debate can be wonderful in theory, but I have rarely seen that theory proven out in reality. And the problem why it is so difficult to translate a good, healthy debate from theory to actual practice is exactly as Alex has said, that the ego gets involved. So one of the things that I notice that I hope that you would also pay attention to is what happens when people argue or debate. So you have seen this many, many times, how one person starts to make a whole bunch of points, okay? There's maybe several distinctive points that he makes. However, the first point that he makes is so incredibly ludicrous from the other perspective that the other person interrupts right away. Whoa, hold on 1 second. Wait 1 second. I need to respond to this point that you just made. And the person who's not done with the rest of his points will say, can I finish? I let you finish. Now you have to let me finish. So think about what's really going on here. Okay? One of the tactics, I talk about debating tactics quite a bit. One of the tactics is to steamroll over your opponent by stringing together a whole bunch of distinct topics, distinct points, and just deliver them one after the other to quote unquote score points. And the idea being that the one that eventually the other person responds to is going to be like the last point that you made. people usually get outraged, a couple of points in, start to lose their head, start to want to respond right away, hence the mutual interruption back and forth. And most often, it isn't that one side is polite and waits for the other side to finish, while the other side is rude and is constantly interrupting. In the typical debate or argument, both sides are engaging in constant interruptions to one another. Both sides have their ego heavily invested, heavily involved, and therefore they want to interrupt the other person the moment they hear something that they want to respond to right away. So when you observe further, you will quickly see that it is just not productive. It doesn't really advance what we really want, which is to learn more about life. Susanna, yes, you're absolutely correct. There is a secular Buddhism. In fact, one might argue that when the original Buddha taught, his understanding about the world, it did not involve, the ancient Hindu gods. So 2,500 years ago, Hinduism is what people had, and along came Sakyamuni Buddha, who taught without, constant references to these ancient Hindu deities. So he could have been seen as an atheist back in his days. It's just that because people have a need for deities, not all people, some people have a need for deities, that they elevate the various Buddhas to the status of gods. So, so one more to say is that absolutely, Alex, you are correct. I am with you in feeling that I personally would much rather have a harmonious relationship than to be right. In fact, I don't really need to be right. I don't really need to be seen as right. I still have my internal compass. I still have my internal thoughts and ideas and opinions and code that I follow rigorously. It is not important for me to expose that to the world and demand that other people follow the same code that I follow. Having said that, I would also acknowledge the difficulty to resist the temptation to debate. You have all seen it. I think you have all felt it. Sometimes the temptation to engage, to jump into a debate, to come back with a rebuttal, to yell back something that obviously proves the other person false, sometimes that temptation is so incredibly strong, it is almost overwhelming. In fact, in recent times, because we're in the middle of our election year, there's so much going on in the real world that provide many sources of such powerful temptations. As I'm looking at a television, broadcast, of some event, a speech, a political speech, I may feel that almost overwhelming temptation to jump in and engage in some sort of debate. But then, of course, I would only be top vision, which cannot really respond to my points. So that will be rather pointless. But I did experience those heated emotions, proving that I haven't entirely done away with my ego. Now, when I saw this particular philosopher, Harvard-educated, degree from Princeton, engage in falsehoods about the political realities of our times, I definitely got very hot under the collar. Smoke started coming out of my ears, and I wanted to yell back at the television. So Alex, a very timely topic, something that we all need, something that we all need to keep in mind as we continue on for the next 3 months until November. There's going to be many more chances, many more causes for us to feel combative, argumentative with one another. So I think your presentation could not have come at a better time, Alex.
Thank you, Derek. I appreciate that. I agree with you. That this is definitely a good time. An election year is a good time to practice saying you are right when you come across different points of view that you may not necessarily disagree with or agree with. Or
Exactly. Yeah, even the most outrageous statements, if I can train myself to say, hey, listen, you're right, and without adding what I really want to say, right? Which is, you're right in your own petty little universe. You're right, something like that. I can completely do without the other part of it, which is really meant to be a barb, meant to sting the other person, and we can be better than that. A lot of people can do it, so as a Tao cultivator, you're called upon to do what is difficult, not what is easy.